Abram the expat. Have you ever heard of the term digital nomad? Well, while the concept of a digital nomad is new, the concept of nomad in general, listen, is time of old itself is nothing new. We want to show you today that, listen, some people are called to pick up and move from their hometown, their city, state, or even their home country in some cases in light of God's plan for their life. Today I'm going to take you on a journey, part one, part two, of Abram's journey in the Bible as a nomad. And I'm going to challenge you personally to ask God if he's called you to move from one place to another, maybe a new job, new city, new state, or possibly even a different country, according to his plan, his will, not your own. In the end, you have one decision to make. If God is calling, will you go? Greetings, everybody. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo. This is Reason for Truth, the channel and organization that helps you, both Christians and non-Christians, to cut through the fog of culture's distorted truth. Because in a relative world, the truth doesn't change, but the human will to distort it certainly does. We cut through the distortion of current events with the truth as an antidote to the false messages that are so pervasive in our world today. And as you know, Reason for Truth, the truth here always comes first. The reasons come last, but we're always and constantly learning, because when we stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching well. Before we get started, make sure to do a couple things. Smash, man, that subscribe button. Boom, just knock that thing out. Then give the Guncio Sinistro, it's Italian for left hook, to the alert bell down there. In all Italian cities, you got a bell. You don't have a clock. So just ring that bell and listen. I'll show up a couple times a week. You'll love it. Anyways, if you haven't heard the term digital nomad yet, well, be prepared to be amazed, because even perhaps shocked over the past 10 years or so with the advance of technology, especially with the internet. More and more people are working remotely. And as such, millions of people who are no longer constrained by the limitations of a physical office, a physical desk or chair, now they can work anywhere in the world, in the state, in the country, anywhere in their house, anywhere in the world. Listen, most nomads are young, right? They're in their 20s, in most cases 30s, or, mostly millennials, or they're of retirement age. Those are the two times we can come and go a little more easily. But people are more and more increasingly moving into not only different parts of the state or different states within the country, they're leaving to different countries. Almost 1 million people in the United States of America alone, collecting Social Security, don't live here. It's cheaper to live elsewhere. I'm just telling you the truth. I'm not telling you what you should do, but I'm just telling you the facts of this life, a thing called the digital nomad. We talk about it living in a digital world. There's good and bad in that. Maybe that's not a bad thing here. Moving to countries, maybe you got a great view of the water, the life is slower paced, the food is great. And listen, anywhere in the world sometimes creates a whole different community. And that's what we want to talk to you about today. And listen, life event, there's a thing called the Life Event Conference. It's set for May 11th and 12th. I just read about it. I don't know if it's good, bad, or ugly, but it looks very corporate. It's here 2022, that is, year. And it's going to be an actual trade show, but it's also going to be offered virtual for people all over the world to attend. And they're going to be attended by many organizations. Companies are realizing that they not only have to just source local talent, they could be anywhere. But this has been going on for years. You look at corporate America, how often does the CEO live in, half the other part of the United States? Used to work for a guy, lived in Boston, but you know what? He ran a many multi-million dollar organization in Chicago. So we're in Illinois. So at the end of the day, I'm like, man, why would they pay that money? Well, that's the way the world goes. It's called the global world. I mean, it's just transportation and communication have increased. And but there's different, now the digital nomads are a little bit different because they take it a step further. They really take it, in most cases, outside the country. Give you an example. There's an organization called NOMA, N-O-M-A Collective. And they state this: we believe that the 9 to 5, that's not a 9 to 5 workday, is due for an upgrade. And they say this: we're disrupting the way that your working life can look. For the better, we combine all the best parts in life. Meaningful connections, exciting travel, great food, life-changing experiences, personal growth, and we fit it around your workday. It's interesting. They featured nomad communities in one of the article that I looked at. It had Argentina, Panama, Kenya, and I've seen a lot of hot spots for nomads all over Europe, even Asia and parts of Africa. It's very interesting. Sometimes even Middle East. Less there, but the tax breaks for the real wealthy are there. Very interesting, the whole concept of digital nomad. Now, before you judge these nomads, it's important to understand that, listen, what they're looking for. Their biggest focus is community and freedom. Some people say, well, you got to grow up and get a job sometime. Now, let's just back up here. How many of us are chained to a job? We're taught to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, be at the office at 7 in the morning if we want to get a jump on our day, 7, 8, and work till 6, 7 o'clock at night. We're like animals. That's what we've become for the corporate world. I'm not saying all companies are all jobs, but if you work for a public company, listen, you're a captured animal. You got the pressure, and if you want to make any level of money that's a little higher, you're going to have to pay the price of the piper. But everything's going now, especially with COVID. Listen, that's freed up a lot of people. They're already becoming nomads before COVID, but COVID, man, it just accentuated that. Now corporate America is looking in great part for nomadic talent. Listen, they'd rather have a person that lives in even another country, even as an American citizen living abroad, if they've got the skill sets, if they can make that happen. Listen, it's not just about local community. It's not just about jobs. But it's about community in general for especially a lot of these people, old and young alike. They just want to be with other people. They don't want the backbiting. They don't want the politics. You don't get that so much when you work on your own. I know. Why? Well, I left Washington, D.C. in 1999. I've skip a lot of politics. You just get to do your job. Wouldn't trade it for the world. All the headaches of stepping on people, all the gossip, all that stuff, you kind of bypass. But, community with folks around the world is important. Personally, I think this is a great benefit. I think this is the greatest thing, working nomadically, whether it's just in your home, right next to your office, or it's in another country, whatever, listen, God calls you to. There's some drawbacks and some benefits. One of the drawbacks is the lack of being planted in one place, whereby you can get some accountability with church for a Christian. That's huge. Community and accountability are important. It's been, listen, the norm for millennia has been, I don't even think has been the way we do it in the present. Years ago, you did a job. You didn't have to get there early in the morning, didn't have to work late in the night. People worked hard, but it's mostly manual labor. And the whole idea of a 9 to 5, I was just reading, was created by Ford Motor Company. That didn't happen. The whole idea of a 9 to 5 didn't happen till then. Before then, everyone worked on farms. Everyone worked long hours, but no one told them, hey, you got to be in the office at this time. And you were out in Mother Nature. So the whole advent of sitting behind a desk and a computer is a new thing. Anyways, that being said, I don't blame nomads in general. Listen, humans were not made to be prisoners of corporate entities, and they're buying their time, not their productivity, as I said. In the past, you had to go to an office 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. You just were captured there. If you left at 5 back in Washington, D.C., in my day, you were called a slacker. You had to stay at least till 6. That's why Washington, D.C., when I lived there, was rated year after year worst place to raise children. Why? Child neglect. No one's ever home to be with their children. All right. Do you see such a life structure in the Bible, though? I don't. I'd submit that the millennials are doing the right thing, at least moving in the right direction. Don't have it perfected in gaining back authentic friendships, community, more peaceful life, and a meaningful life out of the confines of a politically corrupt and, corporate political monster, especially within public companies, because public companies there's no Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith that you're accountable to who's going to look out for you. You're just a number. Now, millennials are smart in that they don't really care to become machines or slaves to these public companies. They're happy to work with them, but on their terms, and I don't blame them. I think it's better than the advent of unions, which is corrupt in and of itself. But they want to be independent agents of freedom for their life, and I'd assert that this leaves more room to hear God's calling in their life, if they're open to it. But it really means that they're going to have a reliance more on the personal. They have personal choices as opposed to being forced by their employer to subscribe to their, health benefits, retirement program, and all the essentials of their life. Reason why health care is tied to their employer, though that's a good way for authorities to keep you in check. I mean, people won't leave jobs just because they don't want to lose their health care. And that should be that way. Health care should be in your hands between you and your doctor, and that's enough. All right, let's shift gears now. Anyone who knows me or has been watching our channel for any length of time knows that I'm the son of a Sicilian Italian immigrant. My father, Mauro Garofalo, he left this beautiful sea view home. I've been to the house he grew up in, house he was born in, right on the Mediterranean, beautiful. Had farmland in the family, lots of it, and they left here to escape really the incoming Mussolini fascism that was coming. And don't appreciate it's kind of arrived here in America, but that's sad, but it is what it is. They came here in the 1930s, my dad did, to start over in a whole new life where he Listen, they didn't speak the language. This place called America, they only spoke a Sicilian dialect, not even mainstream Italian. My father's father, my grandfather, Giovanni Garofalo, came to New York with my grandmother, Nella, and that's a shortened of her full name. He came here many years before, like many immigrants, to establish himself. You know what he did? He worked in the bowels of ships, a lot of those for the government, and some for private, but he was helping welding. Back in those days, they didn't have computerized automated welding. They were down there in the bowels of the bottom of the ship, well excess of 100 degrees a lot of times, and, working to serve the country and serve his fellow man and to make a mark. When he came here, by the way, my grandfather didn't speak English. You know how he learned? He went to New York, and he got the New York Times, and he taught himself how to teach out of the newspaper. Typical immigrant story. That's the way they did it. A lot of them did it that way. Now, I've been to my father's house, as I said before, in Pozzallo, Sicily. It's one of the furthest, not the furthest. There's a little island, a little further south, but it's about as far south of the mainland as you're going to get before heading out and hitting South Africa, and in between you've got some islands. But anyways, there my father grew up there. Imagine he had a good life. I sat in his room where he was born. I sat on the bed, which I believe is probably the same bed he was born on in the late 1920s. One thing that has been part of my identity growing up is my Sicilian Italian heritage. And people say, yeah, I know, Steve. Well, that's part of who I am. This heritage was ultimately moored, by the way, in biblical principles. Didn't grow up in a house where scripture was recited frequently, but we lived by a lot of biblical principles. And I look back, and they're tied directly to the Bible. Now, I was raised with the spirit of independence as well, because my father came here with a spirit of independence. That's a Garofalo trait. This idea that taking risks and moving from one place to another when needed is something not to be shied away from. When I bought my first house, Washington, D.C. area, I was scared. My brother said, hey, listen, go take the risk. My brother Gary, it's awesome. He said, what's the worst case? Sell the house. I said, he's absolutely right. There's less to be feared than we think. As I've grown up as a believer in Jesus Christ, I carry on with that maverick spirit and philosophy, but within the context now of God's direction and timing according to his will. And in light of my own story, let's switch gears and hear what God's word has to say about this, one of the greatest biblical figures in the pages of the Bible. That's Abram, or Abraham. And we're going to start off today, but I want to go more deeply into that in next part too. But Abraham, we're going to pick up at Genesis 12:1, tells us this. The Lord had said to Abram, or the Lord had said to Abram, I want to keep calling him Abraham, the Lord had said to Abram, go from the country, your people, your father's household, the land I will show you. Now, the Living Translation says it this way. Living Translation is pretty much a pure paraphrase, and it says it like this. This is chapter 12, Genesis, verse 1. The Lord had said to Abraham, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. Saying the same thing in very, not exactly verbatim, but I think it does a good job and it explains exactly what was being said by God in that passage. It's important to note that Abram was a middle-aged man for his era anyways. They lived a lot longer then. He was a ripe old age of 75. He was a very wealthy man, and he settled with his father's extended family in Haran, and he married a lady by the name of Sarai. But they were unable to have children. You know the story, most of you. And Sarah's womb was found barren. She was unable to have children. And then God shows up in Abram's life with very powerful but specific commands and some incredible promises. And it's important to note that Abram is given two-sided instructions, both to go from and to go do, meaning that he has to go from and leave to go from is to leave his home, his land, his country, his family. And then God said, go do, meaning carrying out my calling, God's calling, his mission for Abram's life, a mission that God had for his great plan for the universe. God called Abram to leave behind three things. These include his country, his extended family or his people group, and his father's household. Those are big things. That's a big deal. I can tell you it's a big deal. When I left Washington, D.C., it was a big deal. When my father left New York, that was a huge thing. Italian people, they live pretty much within stone's throw of each other. Families always stay together. That's a good thing, by the way. My father went 3 hours away, and I went 8 hours away further from that. So, listen, Abram was told by God to go to an unnamed land, by the way. I didn't do that. I knew exactly where I was going, which God was yet to show him. That place was what we call Canaan, right? That's where God was sending him. But he didn't tell him, hey, I'm sending you, just go. I'll show you where to go. It's called faith and trust in God. God's calling to Abram left him with two options. First, he could stay put and disobey the Lord, or he can go and leave his life that he had been comfortable. He was established there, and leave his family that he knew, the easier life, to go follow God's call on his own life. I've seen a couple different hallmarks, if you watch any Hallmark, especially around Christmas time. They'll show you these people that, they've been in the family business, and that's a great thing, and they just want to go out and strike it on their own, Well, there's a lot to be said about that, right? Instead of just doing, there's nothing wrong with working for a family business, but perhaps God has called you to do something else. Well, got to step out in faith, be a little bit nomadic. But Abram could not stay where he was at and still obey God. That's the bottom line. It was at this point that Abram was called to leave his pagan culture, where really the moon god was the primary god of the people, in order to commit himself to the Lord's call to move to Canaan to fulfill God's promise to do great things with and through him. Now, Genesis 12, verses 4 to 5, God goes on to say this: So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. And Lot, remember his nephew, went with him. Abram was 75 years old. See, we heard that, when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Now, why God called Abram, who we come to know as Abraham, to leave his home country of to pick up and go to another country altogether, the land of Canaan, not as a digital nomad, by the way, but as an old school nomad. There was no technology, no internet back in the day. But in the Bible, the book of Genesis tells us that Abram left his home state of which is modern day Tel Amaquaqar, that's EL-MUQUAYYAR. That's in Iraq. It's located about 140 miles, which is 225 kilometers southeast of Babylon, and about 10 miles, which is 16 kilometers west of the present bed of the Euphrates River, to go to the land of what? Canaan. Read that in verse 5. Why? Because God called him to found a new nation in a place God said, I will show you. So most all Christians want to know God's will for their life, don't you? I certainly, listen, I try to be astute to that every day, but what are the plans that God has for your future, for their future, for my future? Why, listen, should we get married if you're not married? What job should we take? Sometimes the believer has to make decisions and to move out on their own, move out of their hometown, like I said, their state or even their country. It was at a premarital, or actually I was at a family life marriage conference years ago. I was engaged. I can't remember if we were just married or just getting ready to get married. I think we were just married. We had attended this, and they went to the new marrieds and the new the engaged. And one guy raised his hand and he said, "How do I know I'm marrying the right girl?" He had all the guys in the room, and the whole class was like, raise their hands. Yeah, we wanted to know that. And it was interesting. I wasn't really questioning that, but I was surprised a lot of guys honestly were saying, how do I know that? And, they gave a number of reasons. All these reasons: get to know the person, spend time, blah, blah, look at their family. And then at the end, they said, listen, at the end, just got to do it, right? At some point, it's I do, and that's just the way it is. So, you're not going to, there's not very few things in life that are certain. What do they say? Taxes and death. All right. And salvation ultimately is the only thing that doesn't change in God. All right. Now, it's important to understand a few things, by the way, about discerning and following God's will. First, there's a general call for all believers as revealed through God's word. And this includes things such as to make disciples, right, of other people. Everyone is to do that. Spend time daily in Bible and in prayer, and to be involved with some type of service. I think everybody should be serving the Lord in some way, shape, or form. That's just a scriptural mandate. Second, it really is our responsibility to discern our specific call. And this is kind of what I'm talking about with the nomadic thing. Here we must faithfully fulfill God's general mission, but really he's called us to live more specifically and more mission-based. Just like, listen, God didn't come up and give general specifics to Abram. He said, listen, you are to leave and go to Canaan, or a place I'm going to show you, which turned out to be Canaan. That was a very specific call. And I want to note that as Christians, if we're in a disobedient state, such as Jonah was, right, when he didn't want to go to Nineveh, we're not going to be able to clearly discern God's will and mission for our life if we're in that sinful state or state of rebellion. Romans 12:2 says this: do not conform any longer to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, and his good and pleasing and perfect will. Here's the point. At the end of the day, if we're not in tune with God, we're not going to hear from God. God, first and foremost, wants us in tune with him. From there, he will show us his will, specific as we're pursuing the general, right? That's the way it works. This is, again, a two-part series, so I want to wrap this up, not get too far along into anything more, but I want to leave you with this thought before we head into 2. By the way, a little plug here. You want to make sure you subscribe, hit that alert bell down there. Just get it done with. And then if you do that, you're not going to miss part 2. All right. But anyways, in this spirit of a 2-part series, and in closing, I want to leave you with this thought. In what way do you see your calling, or do you see the calling of Abraham, I should say, to faith and dependence upon him as something you can implement in your life? If you think about it, Abram's call included 2 basic elements, which are faith and dependence on God. God told him to leave. God called him to leave everything and everybody, and didn't even tell him where he was going. God just told him, listen, go to the land I'm going to show you. Can you imagine telling your family and friends, listen, I'm leaving town? And I'm not saying go someplace you don't know where you're going. I'm not saying that. This is a specific case where God's talking pretty much directly to Abram. But listen, to tell your family or your friends, hey, I'm leaving to go from X to Y. God's calling me there. This is a different area. I'm going to relocate family from Washington, D.C. area to Charlotte, North Carolina. My friends and I, they were shocked, by the way, and they thought I was crazy. I'm a local boy. I was a local boy to Washington, D.C. And by the way, I've been a nomad since because I work from home. I love Charlotte, but I'm not a part of it as I was the Washington, D.C. area. That's just the way it was. But the Lord called me to seminary in Charlotte, in part to do the mission that you're watching right now. He gave me a wife, by the way, who would make it clear to me and help me as my helpmate to fulfill God's will and purpose in my life, not only in coming to Charlotte, but the purpose of going to seminary. My office, by the way, took bets on how long I'd last in North Carolina and working from home. The longest, by the way, was 3 weeks. I thought it was the shortest. I was talking to one of my coworkers I used to work with. That was over 22 years ago. God sustained me and blessed me. And when I first moved to Charlotte, I repeatedly thanked God, by the way, for answering my prayer. My desire to move to such a beautiful place as North Carolina, but after a period of time, it occurred to me that my desire was simply given to me by God. His plan and his desire, if I'm seeking him, is going to become his desire. His plan for my life then becomes my desire. See how that works? To attend seminary. Psalm 37:4 is one of my favorite scriptures. It says, delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I think God places those desires first. Question is, even if that means a little nomadic spirit, which it's going to cause on some level, are we going to be obedient? My desire, as it turned out, was God's desire for my life, and I was simply obedient and fulfilling God's desires, which became, again, my desires. And in closing, see these examples of a nomadic life, the structure in the Bible? I do. Now, the point I want to make today is, listen, I don't want you to just pick up and leave wherever you're at just to become a nomad for nomadic purposes. That could mean something on a small level or a big level. It could mean changing jobs. It could be leaving the country and everything in between. And that's between you and God. What I am saying is that you have a nomadic spirit. Leave more room to hear God's calling in your life through the confines of this corporate life. And in the end, I believe that most digital nomads, they're going to get tired, I think, of being so mad. I follow a lot of them on the internet. And I could see that after a period of time, you get to a certain point, you do want to settle down. You do want to have a family. You do want to have a community. But you know what I also see? I never see the nomadic spirit leave them. And to some degree, the whole level of travel and to be able to just live outside the confines of 4 walls, that doesn't leave them either. One thing I believe that's not going to change for the nomads is their connection to the world and this nomadic spirit. And for the believer, this opens up God's calling for them to the world. Not just one place, but the world. And I want to leave you with one thought or one question, which is this. In light of the concept of living a comfortable life, are you faithfully following God's revealed will for your life so that he can guide you in your calling? I pray that you are, and I challenge you to do so. Listen, appreciate you listening to today's episode. Don't stop now, but we got over 600 podcast audios and over 200 videos. Please check out reasonfortruth.org. That's our main website. And if you feel led to help us stay in there, you can hit the donate button to make a donation. It is tax deductible. You also want to check out, listen, if you want to get equipped, check out equippedacademy.com. We have more online classes coming on board now. We're just getting that up and going. Following up this segment is going to be a deeper dive into the life of Abram or the life of Abraham as a nomad in the early stages or the early pages of the Bible. And I want to thank you for watching today. We're going to see you over there. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, and this is your Reason for Truth for today.